So it's important to understand the options available in Microsoft Excel. For one, you can customize the application of Excel to more appropriately suit your needs, or sometimes you can troubleshoot or even solve a problem that you're having with a workbook. So go up here to File and click Options, and we're going to go over most of these menu items over here on the right. We'll start with General. These first three checkboxes enable or disable the pop-up tooltip windows either when you type or do something in Excel. I find them sometimes annoying, but I keep them for the most part. If you have a slow machine, they may take a while to load, and you can disable them here as well. Here's just your font, default font size, etc. I like keeping your number of sheets back at 1, because if you deliver a workbook to a colleague or a client or someone, and you're just using the first sheet and you have sheets 2 and 3 unused but still in the workbook, that just looks kind of sloppy. So I typically put that down at 1 sheets. Your username, this is the author of the workbook. The background, here's just some fancy patterns and designs you can put up here in the top right. The office theme, dark gray, black, and white. I just keep mine at colorful. Black is actually new as of early 2016 when we're recording these videos. Excel's the default program. Here's your check for that. And here's a checkbox to show the start screen. That's basically the file option rather than a blank workbook when you open up Excel. So on to formulas. Calculation options. This is a moderately important section. Let's look at workbook calculation first. You have automatic except for data tables, and manual options. I'd say 49 out of 50 or 99 out of 100 times automatic is appropriate for the application of a workbook. You may want to set it to manual if you're working with a whole bunch of formulas. And the idea behind this is every time you change a value in Excel, all of your formulas recalculate. And if you have a whole bunch of formulas, that recalculation may take a bunch of time, and that may be annoying or prohibitive for some reason. And so you can set it to manual so that you explicitly have to tell Excel to take the time to recalculate the formulas. Automatic except for data tables is kind of a hybrid, obviously. If you select this option, the only formulas that will automatically calculate are those that are not inside data tables. Over here to iterative calculation, by default this is disabled, but you can enable it, and this basically tells Microsoft Excel that circular references are not errors. By default they are errors, and here this basically tells Excel to calculate the circular references. And you need to specify a number of max iterations, because otherwise you could just calculate and calculate for infinity. Down here with working with formulas, R1C1 reference style, I think this is kind of a legacy or just a curious reference style. The principle here is it uses numbers for both the column and the row reference. So for example, cell B2 would be R2C2. Formula autocomplete, table names, and get pivot data. This is basically the nomenclature specific to tables and objects within Excel. I love this nomenclature. It just makes your formulas look a lot more simple and clean. I think the only reason that somebody may want to disable these options are if you want to have all of your references be absolute references, not relative references. If somebody has an example of another purpose you may want to disable these, please let me know. And down here to error checking. By default, it's the green tab in the top left of the cells. You can just disable the error checking, or down here specify which errors will be considered errors. On to proofing. Autocorrect options. This is a pretty slick feature actually. You'll see here by default if you type in parentheses C parentheses, it'll replace it with the copyright sign. Pretty useful. And if you go down here, here's a bunch of typos. So if you type shouldn't wrong, it'll correct it to shouldn't for you. Another thing to note about this feature is you can use it to your advantage. For example, if you're going to type long strings of text that take you time, and often you need to type these, you can create an abbreviation for them. So for example, your email address, if you type at maybe for your email address, you can make it type your email. I've already added this for me. So I'll just showcase this for you now. I'll click OK out of here. Now I'll just type at, enter, and boom, it types my email address. Pretty cool. custom dictionaries, a bunch of other options down here you may want to look through. On to saving though. For the file format, I have mine defaulting at XLSM. That's because I create a lot of workbooks with macros in them. Most people will just use SLSX, and that's just fine. Auto recovery file location. Backstage, this is just a visual kind of representation of opening and saving files. Show additional places for saving, even if sign-in may be required. This is a big one for me. I always disable this, because if I don't have a SkyDrive or now a OneDrive account, it'll still prompt you to log in, and I just don't like that. Similarly, save to your computer. I like saving to my machine by default. With that in mind, here's your default file save location. Now here's a workbook specific option here. I'm going to take a little quick aside here. This is a confusing part about this interface. Some of these options are specific to a workbook and only that workbook, the active workbook that you're using when you open up the options. And most of the options are for the application of Microsoft Excel, which will affect all workbooks that you open. This is an example of a workbook specific option, and this is disabling the auto recover for a workbook. And here's some SharePoint options down here. Next up is the language tab. Not a whole lot to talk about here. If you want to use Microsoft Excel in another language, you can do so here, set that up here. Next up is the advanced tab. There's a lot to talk about here. We'll go over most of it. Editing options first up here. If you want to move up, down, left, or right upon enter, you can do that. Here's a decimal point. If you're working with maybe financial information, you can automatically insert a decimal point. Fill handle and cell drag and drop. Let's just showcase this so you know what that means. It's enabled right now. So I've typed in some data down here, and here's the cell handle down here. So I can drag 3 all the way down, or I can click the top of the cell and it'll go in that direction. And sometimes it's useful to disable that, because if you zoom way out on the data, sometimes it's difficult to actually click inside the cell, and you're always bumbling around clicking on the edges of the cell. So disable that if you need to. I'll keep it enabled though. So editing directly in the cells as opposed to only in the formula bar. Extending the formats and formulas of neighboring cells. Enabling automatic percent entry. It will automatically multiply your value by 100 if it's formatted as a percent. Autocomplete, this ties back in with our proofing chat a minute ago. Alert the user if a potentially time-consuming operation is going to occur. This could be with formulas or copying and pasting or something else. System separators, cursor movement, cut, copy, and paste. So these two first options down here are similar to what we talked about on the general tab right here. These are kind of the little pop-up, hover over tooltip menus. After you paste something, it'll give you that little menu, and you can choose whether you want to paste it just regularly or only the formulas, only the values, only the formats. I think that's really useful. Sometimes that can get cumbersome and in the way, so you can disable those as well. And this last checkbox down here is copying objects. When you copy cells, do you want to bring the objects with them? I'm sure some of you have seen workbooks with 10,000 objects in them that are all hidden because they're at width 0, and nobody knows why the workbook is so big and slow and cumbersome. If you're having problems with that, just disable copying objects. So image size and quality and print here. If you're really using a lot of graphics in the workbook, you can change the settings for those here. Charts. So a number of recent workbooks, I have mine a little bit higher, I think, at 40 here. This helps if you're working with a lot of different Excel files on a day-to-day basis or a week-to-week basis. Number of unpinned recent folders, I have mine down at 5. I just don't like it to be too cluttered. Showing the formula bar, showing screen tips, comments down here. I think this is kind of another goofy part of the interface here. These options, along with many of these other options that we're going over, can actually be changed in the ribbon up here too. So I'm on the review tab. Here's my show all comments. If I change this, it's the same thing. So just 2 ways to get to the same option. And here you can just hide or reveal a bunch of the features in Excel, showing or hiding all of your objects. Again, here's some more options that you can invoke within the ribbon of Excel, showing the headers, showing the formulas versus their values, show the sheet left to right, show your page breaks, show a 0 in cells that have a 0 value, showing your grid lines. I typically hate grid lines. So I disable them on a lot of my fancier kind of dashboard sheets, and you can disable that here as well. You can change the color of your grid lines. When calculating this workbook, these are two checkboxes that can be really helpful for some people. I'm sure you've all seen the pop-up window when you open an Excel file that says, hey, would you like to update these external links? You can disable that here and here. And also right here, if you're using a bunch of custom add-ins and they're giving you problems, you can check out what the errors are here. The easiest brute force fix is just to disable the add-ins, but maybe enabling these errors can help you troubleshoot something as well. Here's actually a pretty cool feature, and I'm not sure why they didn't fully develop this option, but if you type in a path name of a directory with Excel files, every time you open your application of Excel, all the Excel files in that directory will be opened. And custom lists. This is a pretty cool feature as well. So your standard lists are days of the week, months of the year. If in your organization you have other lists of products or customers or something else, you can add a list of those products or customers here, and you can sort the list with your built-in sorting features, A to Z, Z to A. Bunch of data options, and last but not least, Lotus compatibility. Next up, the ribbon and the quick access toolbar. We already covered those. Add-ins. Here you can manage all your Excel add-ins and your custom add-ins and everything else. And the Trust Center. Trust Center settings, there's a bunch of stuff in here. We're not going to go through all of this, but you got macro settings, ActiveX settings, add-in settings, tons of stuff in here. You can trust documents, trust locations. These are actually two that I'll call out. Rather than having to enable or give permissions to documents that you use often, you can just trust locations, and so every document or every file in those locations will automatically be trusted. Be careful with what you put in these locations if you do allocate some trusted locations, because malicious code can be created within Excel files.